They don't need to show fraud. That they need to show is that the superstructure of the counting process was unreliable and can't be trusted. First up, though, is the status of the legal disputes being raised and the other issues being raised by the president, by President Trump's campaign legal team, which is now led by Rudy Giuliani. Joining Rudy Giuliani is Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, who has been helping the president for about a year plus now, and Joe diGenova and Victoria Tenzing, who you may know as well, top hard-charging lawyers. Joe is a former U.S. attorney, Victoria, a former top official in the Justice Department. So there are claims pending in Philadelphia, a new lawsuit in Nevada. And what are the big issues the big issues that are remaining in my view that need to be, that there should be no question about in terms of what happened and in my view, what the relief should be. I guess there'll be a question about what the relief will be. But there's no question that there is a dispute, a credible dispute about what happened in Pennsylvania in the delay in the counting of ballots after Election Day. And what's being alleged in litigation and what's being alleged, generally speaking, by the president's team is that state law required them to be able to observe the counting of the ballots. And even though they were technically let in some instances, they weren't let in and able to observe in any credible way, in the sense that it was a giant room. They were kept away from a lot of the counting, couldn't see it visibly enough. And therefore, the requirement to observe the ballot being counted was turned into a big fat joke by Pennsylvania officials. And so the allegation is because those ballots were counted illegally and improperly, they can't be fairly attributed and as part of the total votes in Pennsylvania. And that would essentially turn the election in Pennsylvania, at least, back to President Trump. I think similar allegations have been raised in Michigan and other places, but that's the big fight in Pennsylvania. Now, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania in a state case, and the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania is terribly partisan. And they said, well, they got in and, they could observe. And that's a big argument. I don't think they're going to fight. I don't think that issue is going to be necessarily disposed of as easily by the federal courts. If this issue, I think, is raised, as I think it should be, by President Trump and his team. But this is not over in that regard. And this is why the Pennsylvania state legislature has got to look very carefully whether they will willingly certify a process that essentially has called into question the counting of 600,000 votes. I think it's 682,000. I'm kind of going on memory there. And so if that's the case, the state legislature can certify election results that don't include the suspect ballots or the suspect ballot counts, which is the issue here. They don't need to show fraud. That they need to show is that the superstructure of the counting process was unreliable and can't be trusted. And so now it's up to the Pennsylvania state legislature, in my view, to decide whether or not they want to bless this mess, as I've been calling it, whether they want to certify results that are really can't be certified in any credible way, or whether they're just going to go along to get along and move on. And if that's the case, obviously those votes will be counted, or the electors will be counted in the Electoral College when it meets in Electoral College, essentially, the meeting of the Electoral College is essentially 50 meetings that take place in the various states where these votes are certified. And then later in Congress, January 6th, Congress meets to essentially ratify further the Electoral College counts. Now, if there aren't enough Electoral College votes for any candidate to win, Congress, it goes to the House immediately. If there are challenges, then it's a very complicated process. I shouldn't say they're very complicated. It's not that complicated. The two houses meet separately and try to resolve, decide on each house decides whether to challenge Electoral College votes. And it's not clear what happens if they decide differently. If they decide together to remove the votes, then potentially it goes to the House again then. So the makeup of the Senate will be very close one way or another. It could be the Republicans, it could be the Democrats that control the Senate. And even if the Republicans control the Senate, who knows how a challenge will turn out. So the President Trump doesn't necessarily have a slam dunk case if a dispute rises in Congress in terms of having the dispute upheld. But the point being that the process allows him to, or allows those in Congress to challenge this issue. And my question to you is, if you live in Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, all states that couldn't get their act together to count the ballots, in my view, in an appropriate fashion, whether you've called your state legislators to remind them they have independent obligations to make sure that this was done properly. And certainly any of you listening can call your senators and congressmen to remind them of their obligations to make sure this was done properly as final certifiers of the Electoral College count that will come to them in January of next year.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.